here's the problem, right? And I think this is the problem that the Democrats have right now is you go, we're impeaching Donald Trump. And you go, okay, why? What did he do? Tell me real quick what Donald Trump did. And there's not a real quick answer to it. I've seen all these people out there who's like, he abused his power or he did this. It's like, yeah, but specifically, like, what did he do? And by the way, I saw Maxine Waters, that genius, on Ari Melvin, I forget his name, Ari something show on MSNBC. And she started asking, and he asked her, do you think you should impeach Donald Trump? And she was like, yes, we have to impeach Donald Trump, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, well, why? So they played a video of her in the 90s when she was saying this is ridiculous to impeach Bill Clinton. And he asked her, he goes, well, what's different, now that we should impeach this president? And she started going off on the way he talked about minorities, the way he talked about women, the way he talked about this. And you're like, wow, this is crazy that you're not leading with this is why we have to impeach him. You're leading with, I don't like this guy.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but that's not an impeachable offense. I mean, I don't think. So here's the thing, right? The claim would have to be, and here's what the claim would have to be, is that Donald Trump threatened to withhold military aid to the Ukraine unless they dug up dirt on his political rivals. That would have to be what you're saying. Now, I'm not saying that is not an impeachable offense. I suppose it could be. You could certainly think that there's something fucked up about threatening to withhold military aid to a country unless they dig up dirt on your political rivals. But there's a few problems with this narrative. The major problem is that nowhere does Donald Trump say that.
Yeah, he was slick.
There's nowhere where he says anything even close to, we're going to withhold military aid. He never even talks about withholding military aid in the actual transcript. He just talks about how we help you guys a lot. And then he talks about getting to the bottom. He says, I want a favor, basically, to get to the bottom of this Russia interference, Russia investigation, how this whole thing started. And then at one point in the transcript, he throws out there, he goes, yeah, and I think you guys should look into this Biden thing. A lot of people are saying this was corrupt. It always seemed corrupt to me. I think you guys should look into that. But there's nowhere there where he goes, you won't get this money unless you look into that. I mean, it's not true at all. So here's the connection they're trying to make. Here's what they're trying to claim. Well, this was like a mob technique where you go kind of like, yeah, but it sure would be nice if you did this, and that there's an implicit threat. And they want to make that connection, that even though he never said it, he was making this clear to them. And then the fact that months later, they slowed up, they actually withheld military aid. There's a few big problems. There's a few big holes in that narrative. Now, here's the first one, well, the one I just mentioned, right? The first one is that he never says that. Calling it a mob tactic.
I think it is a mob tactic, and I think it's kind of obvious what he was doing, but you can't prove it. He was very slick in the way he had that conversation, and that firstly, he started off, it was salesy. He goes, hey, we do a lot of these things for you. You appreciate that. Yeah, and you really enjoy that we do those things for you?
No question to me.
Yeah.
I think Donald Trump was trying to persuade the Ukraine to get to the bottom of, to give him whatever information they have about this. And also, by the way, if there was anything criminal about what Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were doing, I'd love that too. Okay, but that's not enough to impeach. What you'd have to impeach is that he actually used the power of government in order to get them to do this. And there's a few major problems with that. Number one, he never actually says this, as you pointed out. That could just be him being slick. But you don't have him saying this. None of that's in the transcript. Nobody seems to have any evidence of that. And the other thing is that a big problem is that, yes, Donald Trump did, after that, months later, withhold military aid for the Ukraine. But what the Trump administration is claiming is that basically what he was doing with that was going like, well, why are we just supporting everybody else and not getting anything out of it? Which has been a consistent theme of Donald Trump's since he was a candidate. Yeah. He's been talking about what's wrong with NATO, what's wrong with foreign aid, and just from a business perspective, like we're paying all the bills, and what do we get out of this? Okay, so that he's got an answer, whether you agree with it or not. He's got an answer for what that was. But here's what I think is the most devastating problem for the Democrats' narrative with all of that, is that if you're claiming that we all know what happened here was Donald Trump withheld this military aid as a quid pro quo, that he wanted something in return, and what he wanted was dirt on a political rival. Okay. So he wanted them to investigate Joe and Hunter Biden, or he wouldn't give them military aid. Well, the problem is that he then gave them the aid. So they first held back on giving him the aid, and then they gave it to him. So they got it, and they never investigated Joe Biden or Hunter Biden. So if you're saying this was a deal, well, there's this one glaring piece of evidence that contradicts that, which is that he gave them the aid after holding it back. He gave it to them, and they never did that thing. So that seems to point in the direction that this wasn't exactly what you're claiming it was. I don't know.
Also,
now does this really matter in the grander scheme? I'm not sure, but it just there's nothing. There's not like a simple look with Bill Clinton. As dumb as the reason that he ended up getting impeached was, at least it was easy to explain. He committed perjury. There, we're impeaching him for committing perjury. It's a crime. Okay, the guy was disbarred over it. He committed perjury. So there you go. That's the crime. I mean, we threw a few people of Trump's people in jail for this crime. So if you could throw them in jail for that, okay, we can impeach you for that. At least there's that crime. Now, to most people, this actually grew support for Bill Clinton, and they supported him more after this because it did seem petty. It was like, yeah, he committed perjury, but over a blowjob. Like, yeah, he cheated on his wife and didn't want to admit it. And most people just went, yeah, that's not really, even if that is against the letter of the law, it's not exactly what.
It's rude to show up to court with your wife there and go, yeah, I did get the blowjob.
Right.
No one wants you to do that.
In some ways, that's a shittier thing to do than to lie. Be a decent person and lie about this. So, but at least it was easier to explain, whereas this one is very difficult to articulate quickly what exactly he did. But there also is a bigger, if you want to get into the nature of how government works, and maybe this is what's weird from the perspective of an anarchist, or from the perspective of even somebody who's just a small government free market guy in general, where you really don't think, if you think like 90% of what the government does, it shouldn't be doing to begin with, you're like, none of this should exist. So I don't think this is how it should work. Like the way it works now, I don't think this is how it should work. But given that it does, is it necessarily a good thing that world leaders can't speak in secrecy?
Oh, man, dude, and that's what I was thinking.
I don't know that that's a good thing at all. Tucker Carlson made this point the other night.
But can I ask you?
Oh, go ahead.
I think there's got to be a platform by which these guys are having conversations that we don't know of and don't see.
Maybe not.
There's no way that if Obama wants to talk to, if Trump wants to talk to Putin, there isn't some cell phone somewhere where Putin answers.
I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know that you're right about that.
That just seems really.
Well, that I actually think that you might be wrong. I mean, the truth is, and Donald Trump said this. I mean, look, I don't know. Maybe we don't know. But Donald Trump said before, he goes, I know every time I talk to another world leader, there's a whole bunch of spies who are like listening to what I'm saying. So he goes, of course I'm not going to say something like that, crazy like this. That was actually one of his defenses over the thing. Now, Tucker Carlson made this point the other night, which is like been well known. There's lots of like documentaries and reports about this, but that the closest, the world ever came to nuclear war was during the Kennedy administration at the height of the Cold War. And during the whole Cuban Missile Crisis thing. And that basically, because Kennedy and Khrushchev were able to get secured conversations, they were able to avoid blowing up the world. And more or less what ended up happening, I mean, I know it came down at one point to like one guy on a ship who was given the order to fucking like send a nuke and didn't. And there was more or less Kennedy, I think at one point Kennedy even said, he goes, even if the Soviets launch a nuke, I'm not going to retaliate with a nuclear strike privately. Like he was just like, straight, look, I'm not going to be the president who fucking ends the world. And you have to understand that at the time, nuclear power was a very new thing, right? Like we had just developed the bomb. What did we develop in 1945 or 1944? And we dropped it in 45. And a nuclear bomb had been dropped for the first time. And now you're talking about, less than 20 years later, and the Soviets have a bomb and we have a bomb and we're in this conflict. And it's like, holy shit, for the first time ever, human beings have the power to destroy all life on the planet, and we're flirting with doing it. And the idea that if you have someone, to this day, for all these other problems, we still have all these weapons. In fact, we have far more sophisticated weapons now than we did then. And about 90% of the world's nukes are held between Russia and America. And if, this is one of the things that's been so crazy throughout this whole, first few years of the Trump administration, is that he's talking about trying to get along with Putin. They seem to have somewhat of a good rapport, and then a whole bunch of people around them are like, you're a traitor for doing this. And it's like, what normal person doesn't think it's not the worst thing in the world if the two heads of state who run their militaries, who have 90% of the nukes in the world, are like, hey, let's talk.
Yeah.
I would much rather those guys be able to talk than have the CIA in there fucking, undermining Trump every time he talks to them.
Like, he should be able to get on the phone and be like, yo, Putin, you cool? And he's like, yeah, man, I'm cool. I gotta get out there and say some dumb shit to my people, but we're both cool here, right?
So, yeah, just be like, the Jews in the media, huh? And he's like, I know, it's the Jews in the media. That's not Russian. That was more German. He goes,
I was on board.
Yes.